massive diversion of funds by Reliance ADA Group led by Anil Ambani. This involves 28,874 crore rupees that was diverted from listed companies of the group in a fraudulent manner. In addition, around 1.53 billion landed in some ADA Group companies in equally dodgy transactions. An investigation by Cobrapost reveals a massive banking fraud amounting to more than 28,874 crore rupees that the Reliance ADA Group has indulged in since 2006. The group is owned by Anil Ambani and his family members. The fraud involves siphoning off funds from listed ADA Group companies. The source of the funds was bank loans, IPO money, and money raised from bonds. In addition, about $1,535 million raised abroad was routed to India in what are dodgy transactions. This includes $750 million a mysterious benefactor company, Any Exchange Capital, Advance to Emerging Market Investments and Trading Pte. Emirates of Singapore during a custody arrangement with Reliance in a venture. The entire sum of $750 million was routed to India and made to disappear, so were the subsidiaries through which diversion of funds was effected to Reliance in a venture, the holding company of the ADA Group. This is potentially a case of money laundering. Similarly, $785 million raised in external commercial borrowings found its way into various ADA Group companies, taking the total to $1,535 million. The companies involved are Reliance Communication, Reliance Capital, Reliance Home Finance Limited, Reliance Commercial Finance Limited and Reliance Corporate Advisory Services Limited. We have identified dozens of subsidiaries and shell entities both offshore and inland, which are involved in this fraud. An example of the fraudulent diversion luxury yacht which was acquired by Anil Ambani in 2008 from abroad. This luxury yacht was bought out of $20 million that was diverted from Reliance Communication. Some of our findings are as follows: Reliance Infrastructure, along with Reliance Capital, Reliance Home Finance, and Reliance Commercial Finance, diverted 14,529.18 crore rupees to both offshore and Indian entities. The funds were funneled back to ADA Group promoter companies though Edico Ventures, a promoter group company, after which the entities involved were merged. Reliance Capital's subsidiaries, Reliance Home Finance Limited, Reliance Commercial Finance Limited and Reliance Corporate Advisory Services Limited have together pulled off a fraud of 14,344 crore rupees. They have done so by diverting funds, creating one layer after another layer to cover the tracks. Cobrapost has also unearthed activities which potentially classify as money laundering under the PMLA. Some of them are also in contravention of FEMA. The ADA Group companies have been found indulging in such activities since 2006, resulting in diversion of $1.53 billion to India in an unlawful manner. It will be in order to recall that Anil Ambani gifted his wife, Tina Ambani, a luxury yacht few days before Christmas in 2008. Luxury yacht was bought from Ferretti Spa of Italy through Amolite Holdings, a ADA Group company. In a grand gesture of their love, he christened the yacht Tian, a combination of their names. Yacht created quite a buzz in the media. The acquisition also drew the attention of customs authorities. They slapped a bill of 28 crore rupees on the ADA Group company after the yacht was docked near Mumbai's iconic Gateway of India. It was impounded by the customs authorities in February the next year, which forced the company to approach the Bombay High Court. Sometime later, the petition was withdrawn to reach an out-of-court settlement. But the story is not as simple as it sounds. This personal luxury was acquired in a circular manner using questionable means. For the funds worth around $20 million for the acquisition was sourced from Reliance Communication, which were routed by Gateway Net Trading Private Limited of Singapore through Reliance Transport and Travels. Gateway Net Trading is a wholly owned subsidiary of Reliance Communication. Initially, Reliance Transport and Travels was deputed the task of procuring luxury yacht. The task was redelegated to Amolite Holdings Limited for a sum of $400,000 on a one-year-long contract. A memorandum of understanding was executed on 22 October 2008. Interestingly, Reliance Capital had a 50% stake in Amolite Holdings Limited. Curiously, Amolite Holdings had entered into an agreement with Gateway Net Trading for the supply of 10 million handsets of specified make, technology, and features. As per the agreement, Amolite Holdings was to act as a trading agency and provide such services as the supply of handsets to Gateway Net Trading. There was one problem, though. Amolite Holdings was not in the business of procuring mobile phones for consumers. And it never did. Gateway Net Trading acted as the vendor to Reliance Communication for providing handsets. In fact, Reliance Communication was also a corporate guarantor for any future funding in the company. Instead of supplying the handsets, Amolite Holdings purchased yacht from Ferretti Spa of Italy for Euro 11,640,875. Gateway Net Trading paid more than $18 million to Ferretti Spa on the instruction of Amolite Holdings for the acquisition. In the final step, ADA Group promoter company Reliance Capital, which owned a 50% stake in Amolite Holdings, wrote off the equity investment it had made in Amolite Holdings in its books. It is interesting to note here that Amolite Holdings, which had a capital of $2,000 only, had no business to show, which means it was a shell entity. This is how the yacht was acquired, with money diverted from a listed entity like Reliance Communication, which was one of the most resourceful and promising enterprises in the ADA Group's kitty. This event cast a long shadow over the company in the coming years as it began to pile up debt, and its attempt to keep afloat were fruitless even after it raised 4,800 crore from investors by selling 338 million shares in 2014. Ultimately, the company became insolvent in 2023. The total outstanding debt this ADA Group company owes to over 45 banks is 47,000 crore rupees. Reliance Infrastructure is the largest company in the Anil Ambani-led ADA Group, which is in a myriad of businesses across sectors ranging from infrastructure development and power projects to power generation, transmission, distribution and trading, to engineering, procurement and construction services, and defense and aviation. The company develops projects through various special purpose vehicles and subsidiaries. It is worth noting that Reliance Infra is the execution arm of Reliance Power, serving as its engineering, procurement and construction contractor (EPC) for large power plants. Anil Ambani and Reliance Infra are promoters of Reliance Power and hold, respectively, 19.1% and 24.88% stake in Reliance Power. The rest of the stake is held by institutional and retail investors. Cobrapost investigation reveals that Reliance Infrastructure has diverted funds amounting to around 14,529 crore rupees from group companies to shell and offshore entities and from their back to promoter group companies. A special purpose vehicle by the name of CLE Private Limited was created for the express purpose of extracting funds from Reliance Infrastructure, Reliance Capital, Reliance Home Finance, and Reliance Commercial Finance in the form of debentures and non-convertible redeemable preference shares. Here is what we found out in the first step. Funds amounting to 14,529.18 crore rupees were siphoned off from Reliance Infrastructure, which contributed the bulk, Reliance Capital, and Reliance Commercial Finance. Yes Bank was also one of the sources of funds. In the second step, a special purpose vehicle, CLEPVT Limited, was created for the extraction of funds. In the third step, the extracted funds were diverted to various entities in the form of debentures, loan advances. A multi-layered corporate ownership arrangement was created for this purpose. In the fourth step, these entities were merged with ADA Ventures, which diverted the funds to offshore entities. All the funds were gradually written off. In the final step, 25 of the companies involved were merged with 6 promoter group companies after the diversion was complete. The name of CLEPVT Limited used for fund extraction was changed at least half a dozen times to keep the diversions under wraps. Funds to the tune of 10,049.28 crore rupees were extracted from Reliance Infrastructure, Reliance Capital, Reliance Home Finance and Reliance Commercial Finance. 10,049.28 crore rupees was diverted from Reliance Infrastructure in 2 tranches. 3,270 crore rupees, 286.90 crore rupees and 123 crore rupees was extracted from, respectively, Reliance Capital Limited, Reliance Commercial Finance Limited, Reliance Commercial Finance Limited and Reliance Home Finance Limited. These are all ADA Group companies. Surprisingly, the source of the rest of the funds was Yes Bank, which contributed 800 crore rupees to the total amount of 14,529.18 crore rupees diverted to the SPV, a kind of quid pro quo. It may be recalled that currently the Enforcement Directorate is investigating Anil Ambani for dubious transactions which he is alleged to have conducted with Yes Bank through his companies. In the second step, 14,529.18 crore rupees thus extracted was diverted to 26 entities. Our investigation has identified those 26 entities deployed as conduits for the diversion of funds. These shell entities are In addition, ADA Venture Limited acted as a transferee entity to facilitate the transfer and consolidation of diverted funds in CLE Private Limited, another shell entity, in the form of debentures and non-convertible redeemable preference shares. These funds were plowed back to promoter group companies at a huge premium. Surprisingly, guarantee for all these shell companies was also given by Reliance Infrastructure, which appears to be an afterthought. Our investigation has identified at least 23 entities, among many, which were used for the diversion of funds from CLE Private Limited. We have also tracked around 8,752 crore rupees, which was diverted in the form of CCDs and NCRPS. These companies are These diverted funds were diverted further down to promoter group companies, for which another set of special purpose vehicles or pass-through entities was used. Cobrapost investigation has also identified these 25 entities used for the express purpose. These companies are In order to camouflage the fraudulent diversion of funds, the promoter group companies involved used an innovative approach which consisted in 2 more steps completing the operation. In the first step, 25 of the 26 companies involved in the diversion were merged with the promoter group companies within 3-4 years of funds diversion. Another interesting fact is that most of the aforesaid transferor companies are transferee companies of various shell entities which were the beneficiaries of the fund diversion. According to the merger orders filed with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, Aina Softtech Private Limited, Northstar Telecom Services Private Limited, Srinath Kripa Project Ventures Private Limited, Nekta Mercantile Private Limited, and Monica Holdings Private Limited were used as transferee companies for the purpose of these mergers. In the final step of the approach, CLE Private Limited was rechristened at least half a dozen times, from Crest Logistics and Engineers Private Limited to Rail Utility Engineers Limited to Rail Utility Engineers Private Limited to Reliance Energy Investments Limited and finally to Sonata Investments Limited. There is no gainsaying that this exercise was conducted to camouflage the fraud which carries an element of conspiracy. If the diversion of funds majorly by Reliance Infrastructure and Reliance Capital, Reliance Home Finance, and Reliance Commercial Finance to offshore entities in a dubious manner was audacious and ingenious in its orchestration, so was the diversion of funds by Reliance Capital through Reliance Home Finance, Reliance Commercial Finance, and Reliance Corporate Advisory Limited. Together, these three companies diverted funds more than 14,344 crore rupees and made it disappear in thin air. The Securities and Exchange Board of India has already indicted Anil Ambani, the key managerial personnel, and several entities in a case related to fraudulent diversion of funds from Reliance Home Finance. The Securities and Exchange Board of India had slapped penalties worth 25 crore rupees and more on each of the entities involved, though the ambit of its investigation was limited in scope. More than that, these ADA Group companies and all key managerial personnel of Reliance Infrastructure, Reliance Capital, Reliance Home Finance, and Reliance Commercial Finance should be prosecuted under various provisions of Companies Act of 2013. Including sections 447 and 188, which make mandatory the disclosure of all transactions involving related parties, the failure of which constitutes fraud. Various sections of Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita dealing with breach of trust, fraudulent diversion of funds, cheating, and criminal conspiracy, among others. So far, what we observed from the agencies concerned is only a lip service. Cobrapost investigation has revealed that Reliance Capital has, together with its subsidiaries Reliance Home Finance Limited, Reliance Commercial Finance Limited, and Reliance Corporate Advisory Services Limited, pulled off a massive fraud of over 14,344 crore rupees. This fraud also consists in siphoning off public funds by the financing arm of the ADA Group in the form of loans secured from various banks. And this was done by creating one layer after another layer to cover the tracks while routing those funds to family coffers. The express purpose of camouflaging the fraudulent transactions was to keep the identities of the ultimate beneficiaries a secret. Cobrapost has found Reliance Home Finance, Reliance Commercial Finance, and Reliance Corporate Advisory Services to have diverted funds worth more than 7,965 crore rupees, 4,979 rupees, and 1,400 crore rupees, respectively, out of the funds diverted by Reliance Capital. The source of these funds, you guessed it right, was 37,000 crore rupees that Reliance Capital, along with Reliance Home Finance, borrowed from various banks which they didn't bother to repay. Now we will throw light on how these three Reliance Capital subsidiaries diverted these funds further down. As analysis of documents accessed by Cobrapost has revealed, Reliance Home Finance has over the years diverted a sum of 7,965 crore rupees by advancing loans to 49 entities. The quantum of funds diverted by the retail lending arm of Reliance Capital in housing and construction sector is more than 50% of its book size. The 49 entities to which these funds were diverted are: You heard it right. One of the companies involved in this fraudulent diversion of public funds is Vadhavan Holdings Private Limited, owned by the Vadhavan brothers of Devan Housing and Finance Limited. In a typical round-tripping exercise, however, the diverted funds found their way to 14 Anil Ambani Group companies, making themselves as much richer at the expense of the lenders and the shareholders of Reliance Capital. The list of beneficiary companies compiled by Cobrapost has all big and smaller from the Anil Ambani Group stable. 4 of these companies shared among themselves more than 7,712 crore rupees in diverted funds, with Reliance Capital receiving 2,359 crore rupees, Reliance Commercial Finance 2,278 crore rupees, Reliance Infrastructure 1,559 crore rupees, and Reliance Home Finance 1,514 crore rupees. The rest of the companies are: It will not be out of place to recall that Reliance Capital had an outstanding debt of 18,483.02 crore rupees in March 2011. Alarmed, perhaps, at the Anil Ambani Group's propensity for delinquency in discharging liabilities towards lenders, the Bank of Baroda conducted a forensic audit of its loan transactions with Reliance Home Finance Limited. The Bank of Baroda, which was the lead bank of a consortium of PSU lender banks, identified in its audit the movement of funds and found Reliance Home Finance Limited had made disbursals of loans to potentially indirectly linked entities between 1st April 2016 and 30th June 2019. This finding implies that the Reliance Capital failed to comply with the mandatory requirements of reporting related party transactions to the Securities and Exchange Board of India. Bank of Baroda's forensic audit was damning in its findings, which can be summed up as follows. The audit identified 8 borrower entities which were earlier classified as related parties of Reliance Power Limited and Reliance Infrastructure Limited and reflected as such in the books of Reliance Home Finance Limited. However, shortly before the disbursal of these dubious loans, these entities were reclassified as non-related party. Reliance Home Finance Limited then disbursed these 8 reclassified entities a loan of 1,323.43 crore rupees. The audit report also averred that these entities did not have any business, let alone cash flow streams, which means they were simply shell companies created to route the funds disbursed to them in loan by the consortium to Anil Ambani-owned group companies. Another striking finding of the Bank of Baroda audit was that most of the companies have a common address and email ID. In many cases, these companies have common or cross-shareholding. It is surprising to note here that the consortium of lender banks led by the Bank of Baroda preferred to twiddle their thumbs in spite of the damning audit report. They did not invoke the corporate guarantee given by Reliance Infrastructure and Reliance Power to recover the unpaid dues or file an FIR under the various provisions of the Companies Act of 2013 and Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita for fraudulently siphoning off funds worth 1,323.43 crore rupees to shell entities even when they had solid evidence. They could have as well filed a case by invoking Section 25 of the Payment and Settlement Systems Act of 2007 to recover the loan. They instead preferred a corporate insolvency resolution process route and approached the National Company Law Tribunal formed under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code (IBC) promulgated by the central government in 2016. Recovery of loans is not as much difficult if the lenders are willing to show will. Here is an example which shows how a delinquent borrower or willful defaulter can be brought around to paying upfront every penny they owed. In 2019, Swedish telecom equipment manufacturer Ericsson claimed its dues of 458.77 crore rupees from Reliance Communications and approached the Supreme Court, which held Anil Ambani in contempt. His elder sibling stepped in to help him avoid a jail term and coughed up the money a day before the deadline to pay up expired. Reliance Corporate Advisory Services, another subsidiary of Reliance Capital, has been used as a special purpose vehicle to route funds to Anil Ambani promoted group companies in the form of 0% debentures and loans. Cobrapost investigation has found Reliance Capital to have routed 1,400 crore rupees through Reliance Corporate Advisory Services. The typical modus operandi used by Reliance Capital to divert 1,400 crore rupees through Reliance Corporate Advisory Services is as follows: advancing loans from holding company Reliance Capital to Reliance Corporate Advisory Services. These funds were then used to grant loans to or make investment in various companies to plow back in personally controlled companies. In most cases, the loan was granted to promoter group companies of various groups like Yes Bank, owned by Rana Kapoor, and Vadvan controlled Devan Housing and Finance Limited, among others. In consideration of these loans and investments, the promoter of ADA Group received kickbacks in Anil Ambani's personally controlled companies from these recipient companies, which is being investigated by the Enforcement Directorate. The value of transactions involved is 1,400 crore rupees, typically a round-tripping transaction to siphon off funds from the company and to hide the blatant fraud from regulatory agencies, auditors and stakeholders. Reliance Home Finance Limited and Reliance Commercial Finance Limited together extended a sum of 288 crore rupees in loan investment to Vadvan Holdings. In turn, the ADA Group companies secured loans worth 1,285 crore rupees in 7 of promoter-controlled companies. These companies are Kunjabihari Developers and Edico Venture, which received, respectively, 650 crore rupees and 635 crore rupees in an apparently round-tripping exercise aimed to camouflage the dubious transactions. It is worthwhile to note that Reliance Corporate Advisory Services and many other Reliance Capital subsidiaries which are recipients of diverted funds are still operational, and a large recovery is possible from the beneficiaries. Instead of taking punitive action against Anil Ambani and the key managerial personnel as provided under the law, the lending public sector banks strangely chose to approach the National Company Law Tribunal. The tribunal approved a bid of 9,861 crore rupees placed by the Mauritius-based Indusin International Holdings Limited to acquire Reliance Capital and its subsidiaries, almost 2.5 times less than the admitted claim of over 26,089 crore rupees in outstanding dues. Indusin International Holdings is owned by Hindujas. The settlement has left investors high and dry, even as the lenders got a massive haircut of 16,222 crore rupees. Cobrapost investigation has further unearthed dodgy foreign currency transactions some of the ADA Group companies have been found indulging in since 2006. These transactions potentially classify as money laundering under the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. Some of these transactions also involve violation of FEMA. These transactions resulted in diversion of around US $1,535 million to India. The value of these funds at present works out to around 13,047 crore rupees at an average exchange rate of 85 rupees against US dollar. The value of the US dollar at that time was around 40 rupees. This was accomplished through offshore companies using an elaborate schematic. In the course of this investigation, Cobrapost found the trail of one massive transaction. This involves US $750, which was received in loan from a mysterious benefactor who disappeared as mysteriously as did the borrowers. The money bounced around to finally land in an ADA Group promoter company. This reeks of money laundering and tax evasion. This how the whole transaction was done. Curiously, one Mr. NG Dersian set up Reliance Projects Pte. Limited in Singapore on 26 July 2006, which led to a dispute after which it was placed with Reliance Innoventure in a custody arrangement. Reliance Projects Pte. Limited was rechristened Emerging Market Investments and Trading Pte. EMITS, and its ownership was transferred to Reliance Innoventure Private Limited to be transferred to Emerging Market Investment and Trading Unlimited (EMITU), a BVI-based company. In December 2007, NEXGen Capital advanced a tidy sum of $750 million to EMITS. This loan was supposedly meant for the Dadri power plant, which never came to fruition. The entire fund was invested in compulsory convertible preference shares of A & Sons Enterprises Pvt. Limited, a ADA Group entity, on 17 December 2007. The funds were downstreamed the same day to A Facilities Solutions Private Limited, only to be further downstreamed to 4 more entities. These 4 companies were later on merged with Reliance Innoventure, the holding company of the ADA Group, in 2008-09 and 2009-10 to cover the tracks. This way, EMITS, which received $750 million from the mysterious benefactor, and the subsidiaries through which the funds were moved to Reliance Innoventure were made to disappear. After summing up the modus operandi using which $750 million was diverted to India, let us discuss in some detail how all the events were orchestrated. 2 weeks after the Reliance ADA Group came into being on 10th July 2006, one Mr. NG Dersian registered a company called Reliance Projects Private Limited in Singapore with a capital of $1. According to the sources and available records, the ADA Group reached out to this company telling them they could not use the name Reliance. Following negotiations, Sian agreed to hand over the custody of shares and control of this Singaporean entity to Reliance Innoventure, the holding company of the Anil Ambani-led ADA Group. It was a temporary arrangement till Sian could change the name of the Singaporean entity, Reliance Projects Private Limited. It was done on 22nd November 2007 by changing its name to Emerging Market Investments and Trading, or EMITS in short. The custody arrangement should have ended there. Instead, a month later, a company called NEXGen Capital gave a $750 million loan to EMITS. This was done against Sian's advice, forbidding any activity and transactions whatsoever in EMITS. EMITS passed $750 million to another ADA Group company called A & Sons Enterprises Private Limited through investments in 29,509,275 compulsory convertible preference shares at a premium of 999 rupees each on 17 December 2007. This aggregated to 2,951 crore rupees at the then prevailing exchange rate of 39 rupees and 31 paise per US dollar. A & Sons Enterprises Private Limited routed the funds as investments into 4 subsidiaries of ADA Group promoter entity, Reliance Innoventure. This was done on the same day A & Sons Enterprises received the funds, and the names of the recipient entities are A Communication Private Limited, A Enterprises Private Limited, AA Power Systems Global Limited, AA Project Ventures Private Limited. These 4 companies, along with the $750 million from the mysterious NEXGen Capital, were merged into Reliance Innoventures between 2008-9 and FY 2009-10. This is how the entire borrowed fund worth $750 million was made to disappear. So were the entities through which the money landed in Reliance Innoventure. The saga of subterfuge didn't end there. On 1st June 2009, a company called Pollack Securities Corp advised Reliance Innoventure to transfer the shares of EMITS to another entity called Emerging Market Investment and Trading Unlimited (EMITU). This company was registered in the British Virgin Islands, a tax haven. Interestingly, EMITU was initially incorporated on 20th May 2009 as Propus Investments Unlimited, and the name change to EMITU was effected from 27th July 2009. This is how layers were created in the cross-border corporate way. In a nutshell, here we have an abnormal case where both the remitter of the foreign currency fund and the ADA Group companies where the money landed have vanished. Only the ultimate beneficiary exists. These transactions are in contravention of the following. FEMA. No prior approval was taken for receiving offshore funds as FDI in an investment company. PMLA. Both the lender and the borrower are non-existent, though the money has found beneficiaries. RBI's NBFC guidelines on core functions of investment company violated by the ADA Group companies. However, here again no action was taken against the ADA Group companies for potential money laundering activity by law enforcement agencies including Enforcement Directorate. You are watching Cobrapost Expose on ADA Group. For more details, please log in to cobrapost.com. This video was automatically generated by an artificial intelligence system using Hagen and may contain inadvertent errors and inconsistencies despite our best efforts at accuracy and quality. We recommend that you peruse and verify the information in this video with the corresponding published story on cobrapost.com. Cobrapost has unearthed two more instances where funds worth $575 million were diverted to India by Reliance Natural Resources Limited (RNRL) and Reliance Infrastructure. These funds were part of $660 million raised abroad in the form of external commercial borrowings, which were routed to India in contravention of FEMA. The proceeds of the borrowings were invested in mutual funds as liquid funds and after some time channeled to offshore entities to be finally written off. The modus operandi was almost the same as deployed for the diversion of $750 million. Here is what our investigation has found. On 17 October 2006, Reliance Infrastructure diverted to India $275 million out of $300 million it had raised in external commercial borrowing. The funds were invested as liquid funds in Reliance Mutual Fund only to be transferred abroad to Reliance Natural Resources, Singapore, Pte Limited and written off. Another big tranche of $300 million was diverted to India in a similar manner by Reliance Infrastructure. This was part of $360 million the company had raised in external commercial borrowing. After the fund was diverted to India, it was deployed again as liquid funds in Reliance Mutual Fund in November 2006. The fund was later on siphoned off to Gurok Ventures, a company based in the British Virgin Islands. While the remaining $60 million of the external borrowings was directly diverted to Gurok Ventures. Another tranche of $150 million raised in external commercial borrowing was also diverted to India. This was meant for a desulfurization process supposedly to be conducted at another power plant. Let us go back in time. On 27 January 2004, Anil Ambani announced his company Reliance Natural Resources would set up a 3,500 megawatt gas-fired power plant at Dadri of Uttar Pradesh, the largest in the private sector. The plant was estimated to cost 10,000 crore rupees. In 2006, Reliance Natural Resources Limited borrowed a sum of $300 million in the form of foreign currency convertible bonds, FCCBs, for the plant. These bonds were to be listed on Singapore Stock Exchange. Another round of funding worth $360 million was secured in a similar manner. These funds were meant for building a pipeline to transport natural gas from KG Basin of Andhra Pradesh to Dadri. The project never took off. However, the ADA Group once again saw an opportunity to pull off another fraud. $275 million of the external commercial borrowings was repatriated to India on 17 October 2006 and the proceeds were invested in liquid funds of Reliance Mutual Fund. This was done in flagrant violation of the end-use restrictions under FEMA. After some time, the funds in their entirety were transferred to Reliance Natural Resources, Singapore Pte Limited in the form of equity and preference shares. Reliance Natural Resources, Singapore Pte Limited was a shell entity wholly owned by Reliance Natural Resources Limited. Later on, the entire transaction of $275 million was written off provided for in the books of Reliance Power in respect of the Singapore entity in FY 2018-19. What is more surprising is the fact that the Singapore entity does not have any business to show, yet it was advanced a sum as big as $275 million. The transaction involved a potential violation of the money laundering law. Although the Enforcement Directorate took note of this violation to initiate the proceedings against some ADA Group companies, the anti-money laundering watchdog developed cold feet sooner than later and pigeonholed the proceedings. In yet another instance, Anil Ambani's Reliance Infrastructure diverted another tranche of $300 million to India out of $360 million the company had raised in external commercial borrowing for the stillborn Dadri power project in November 2006. The funds repatriated to Reliance Infrastructure were again deployed in Reliance Mutual Fund. This is not the end of the story. About 5 months later, in April 2007, the entire amount was withdrawn and invested in Reliance Fixed Horizon Fund. About a year later, the fund was finally siphoned off to Gurok Ventures Limited for investment in March 2008. Gurok Ventures is based in the British Virgin Islands. The balance $60 million was also directly diverted to Gurok Ventures. So, the total amount diverted in this manner stood at $360 million. Surprisingly, after the diversion of funds, Gurok Ventures was rechristened Reliance Infra Projects International Limited only to be changed again. The company got a new nomenclature of Oxagon International Limited. The funds raised in the form of external commercial borrowings and routed to Reliance Infrastructure were invested in the form of 360,000 cumulative non-convertible redeemable preference shares of the British Virgin Islands Company. The shares have been gradually written off in the financial statement and the entire amount has been provided for in the books of Reliance Infrastructure in FY 2020-23. It is surprising to note that Reliance Infrastructure has in its books not disclosed the British Virgin Islands Company as a subsidiary. It is obvious that the end use of the external borrowing was never ensured by Reliance Infrastructure in contravention of the FEMA rules and RBI guidelines. The ADA Group company raised another tranche of $150 million in external commercial borrowing. This came to light in 2008 when the group filed an application with the RBI for compounding of offences under FEMA. In July 2008, the company told the RBI that the money was invested in its mutual fund because the Dadri power project was delayed. More interestingly, while this application was pending, the company applied for its withdrawal in August 2008. It wanted to submit a fresh application by including another tranche of $150 million raised in the form of external borrowing. This sum of $150 million was purportedly raised abroad for desulfurization of flue gas. The RBI dismissed its explanation as well as its plea to include the second FEMA violation while asking the company involved to file a separate application. Under the FEMA, the company was liable to pay a penalty which could go thrice the sum involved. However, the RBI took a very lenient view and instead of directing the company to pay a penalty of 3,798 crore rupees for dubious foreign currency transactions totaling $450 million, it asked Reliance Infrastructure to pay only the total financial gain of 124.68 crore rupees in compounding fee for violating the FEMA rules. The order was signed on 27 August 2008 by then RBI Chief General Manager Salim Gangadharan. It is surprising to note that the central bank did not ask about the source of funds and the ultimate use of funds. It did not alert, either, other agencies such the Enforcement Directorate and seek an inquiry into these fraudulent transactions involving offshore funds, let alone seek criminal prosecution against the ADA Group companies involved in the act. According to RBI's 2011 Master Circular on Compounding of Contraventions, the central bank can refer the matter to the Directorate of Enforcement for necessary action under FEMA if there is sufficient reason for further investigation. You are watching Cobrapost Expose on ADA Group. For more details, please log in to Cobrapost.com. This video was automatically generated by an artificial intelligence system using Hagen and may contain inadvertent errors and inconsistencies despite our best efforts at accuracy and quality. We recommend that you peruse and verify the information in this video with the corresponding published story on Cobrapost.com.